Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. This is the update, the harvest update from the Santa Lucia Highlands Vintners and Growers. My name is Gwen McGill. I am the executive director of the Santa Lucia Highlands Wine Artisans. We are the group of growers and winemakers that produce beautiful wines from the Santa Lucia Highlands in Monterey County. And we're thrilled to have everybody here today. We have a wonderful group, a lot of familiar names and faces, number of industry people. So I think there might be some other winemakers and growers out there. We're happy to have you chime into the chat, put any comments and additions you'd like to have noted about this 2024 harvest. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. As I mentioned, the chat is open. Feel free to ask questions. We've got a couple of folks, Adam and Alison and whoever else on our panels able to. We'll manage the chat. We'll look out for your comments, make some answers, probably call out a couple questions as well. So please feel free to say hi, tell us where you're joining from, or ask any questions. We will also post the recording along with meeting notes, a transcript of this today's event to our website. So we'll send out another email for anybody that misses or has to tune out before we're completed. So I'm going to ask our panelists to take a second now and introduce themselves. Let's start here with Alison, then go to Adam, Steve, and Matt.
Hey everyone, I'm Alison Frichtl. I'm the winemaker for WALT Wines and really excited to be back here. Always wanted to talk to my fellow winemakers and talk about how much we love Santa Lucia Highlands. At WALT, we make Pinot Noir and Chardonnay across the entire Pacific coast, from really focusing on site-specific expression. And we make two gorgeous Pinot Noirs from the Santa Rita Hills, both from the Francione family vineyards. So excited to join the conversation today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Lee. I am the owner and winemaker of Clarice Wine Company. I'm also the consulting winemaker for Rombauer Wines and their Santa Lucia Highlands Pinot Noir. So between the two different, with Clarice, I get fruit from Gary's Vineyard and Rosella's Vineyard. And then with Rombauer, get fruit from as far south as the Guardati Vineyard and as far north as Sleepy Hollow, like 8 different sites in the SLH altogether.
Thank you, Adam. It sounds like Steve may have gotten booted off on his internet. So Matt, why don't you go and we'll get Steve back in a minute here.
Absolutely. Hey, folks, welcome in and thanks for your engagement and interest in Santa Lucia Highlands wines. My name is Matt Revelette. I make the wines for Siduri, a brand founded by my friend Adam Lee, also on this call. Siduri produces, now we've whittled it down to 18 single vineyard Pinot Noirs and 6 AVA blends from a very similar footprint to WALT and what Alison's doing. So Willamette Valley all the way down to Santa Barbara. Santa Lucia has often been referred to as kind of the spiritual home of Siduri wines. Although we make the wines in Santa Rosa, we've always had a very special place in our hearts for the Santa Lucia Highlands. We produce 4 single vineyards, Gary's, Rosella's, Sobranas, and Sierra Mar, in addition to the Appellation blend.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thank you. We'll get started here. Hopefully Steve will come back and we'll bounce him in a second. Adam, maybe we should start with you, since Steve was gonna give us the first update, but you have been, as always, following and coming down to the Santa Lucia Highlands regularly this season. Why don't you take us back a little bit and give us a little quick overview of the season as a whole before we get to harvest?
Sure. So it was a relatively normal year. I mean, last year, or the year before last, 2023 was a late vintage, and we knew it all along that things were running late in the season. Last year was more kind of the norm as far as the timing goes. But one of the things that happened, and we noticed very early on, was the cluster counts, going through and counting the number of clusters per vine. The cluster counts were down about 10 to 15%. From normal, and occasionally you would see around 20% down from normal. We also noticed that the grapes were primarily one-seeded this year. You can have 2 seeds, you can have 3 seeds. One-seeded grapes are particularly juicy in many cases, and that kind of leads into the harvest part, but that is something we noticed at harvest as well, that it was really juicy. We had a good winter's rain, which was great. So it was kind of the norm. And for Santa Lucia, the norm is still a small amount, 12 to 14 inches kind of thing. But really was a pretty normal to warmer kind of season. We didn't have huge heat spikes, but we had a warmer vintage overall, and eventually got to harvest, and things started coming in around, I don't know, mid-September, early to mid-September.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's move over to Alison. Alison, you, like Matt, you guys also have a great contrast since you're making Pinots from pretty much up and down the coast. Tell us a little bit about what you kind of noticed through the season for the Santa Lucia Highlands, maybe versus Napa or Sonoma or further down south.
Well, I totally echo Adam that we were back to like this normal harvest. And I think what was really nice about this one is we were able to pick when we wanted. So Santa Lucia Highlands kind of came in the middle for us. You know, we started out with picking in the Anderson Valley. We really started kicking into gear about the second week of September. And I think one thing that was really nice about this harvest was we were, after a pretty warm summer, I think I certainly was bracing myself for maybe some extreme heat spikes this season, and that didn't come to pass. So that was a real blessing this year. And so, yeah, at Santa Lucia Highlands, we were able to pick this really nice range. You know, we're in the Sierra Mar Vineyard, which is the Francione's higher elevation site. So this is like 1,000 feet above sea level, a little farther south in the area, and also from Rosella's, which is closer to Monterey Bay. And so between the two of those, you know, we're starting about mid-September and picking in between as flavors taste ripe. And so we have a range of ripeness levels coming from both sites that are just going to be an amazing way to blend and bring depth to our wines.
Oh, that sounds beautiful. Matt, give us a little insight to how things started for harvest for you.
Sure. Yeah. Our first day of harvest for Santa Lucia was the 13th of September. So pretty normal. And to that end, it wasn't a very foggy summer for most places on the California coast, but it seems like as soon as the calendar turned to September, the marine layer came back. Those winds that kind of whipped through the highlands were ever present. And like Alison said, we have a really nice range and spectrum of flavors through the vineyards, and the pacing was really nice. There wasn't really anything that threw us off, save for like a really weird kind of storm that rolled through late the third week of September, which didn't affect the Highlands very much, but it did rain like a half an inch in King City during a thunderstorm, which is further southeast. But other than that, the pacing was nice. We got busy and we stayed busy, and then we were done. But I think that the really cool thing about the 24s is there's already a really cool delineation of flavors and vineyard kind of personalities already in barrel.
And you said you started picking around September 13th. How did that compare to, say, Sonoma or, you know, even Oregon, where you're getting fruit from?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of certainly a couple weeks later than when we got started in the warmer pockets of Russian River Valley. You know, the cooling effect of the Monterey Bay and associated fog and wind cannot be overstated. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So Oregon, usually we get busy the third week of September like clockwork, and then it's a very compressed harvest that's done in about 2 weeks, no matter what you plan on doing. The door slams shut with early October rains almost every year, which makes the decision-making often pretty simple. But in the Santa Lucias, we got to make a lot of decisions and kind of take our time and operate at a really nice pace.
Alison and Matt, one of the things that I noticed, I don't know if y'all saw this as well, is a lot of times the southern end of the Santa Lucia Highlands, a bit further away from the ocean, starts out later, but it gets warmer and comes in earlier than the northern end. It didn't seem like it really caught up this year.
It did and it didn't. From what we got out of Sierra Mar, the counts were lower, and also the clusters weren't as big, so there wasn't as much kind of holding it back, at least in pockets. So we started our first pick in Sierra Mar was the 13th, and our last one was 2.5 weeks later with the clone 23. So it kind of did and it didn't, depending on which block you were in.
Yeah, we had a similar experience. Actually, Sierra Mar, which is the more southern but higher elevation vineyard, came in first on the 17th for us. And that was coming from some of their coolest blocks. One is called Island and another called Ridge. And they're just like visually spectacular, kind of exposed. They had a little bit weaker canopies than some other parts of the vineyard, which I think could have contributed to accelerating the ripening there. And then we bounced over to some blocks of Dijon clones in Rosella's vineyard farther north that were just tasting spectacular. Might have been like slightly earlier than we normally would have picked, but we were picking based on flavor there, and super happy with how that turned out. And then bounced back again to Sierra Mar, which was our last pick on the 30th. And that was from a lower elevation part of that vineyard. So it needed more time on the vine. That was our experience.
Yeah, same. We just kind of bounced around. There wasn't the normal pattern, I guess, from south to north, which was kind of cool because, like you said, Austin, you know, the seeds were dark. The tannins had softened. We got this really nice kind of light dimpling on the skins and beautiful flavors and super easy color extraction across the board. And it was just kind of plugging in dates with Gary and taking it from there. It was super smooth.
Yeah, I know that they started a lot of with the Francesco Bizzonis. Found like a lot of the early picks for them. A lot of stuff was the Garys and Sobranis, you know, kind of right in the middle of the AVAs. Kind of.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, that surprised me a bit. There were some early pickers in those vineyards. Of course, you and I were not part of that, Adam.
The other thing for me that I was amazed by was the bin weight. You know, I was like bringing in bins, and like at Gary's, I looked it up. I got 13.25 bins, and they weren't like heaping full or anything like that, just normal. And that should have been like 6.6 tons, and it was 7.2 tons. I mean, the bins seemed to weigh more this year, even though they weren't heaping full.
Oh, interesting. I was just grateful that, you know, one sign of working with really great growers is they don't overstuff the bins. It's actually a really important thing, especially for making Pinot. You don't, you want them below, we call it water level on the bin. Otherwise, especially we're transporting these grapes all the way up to the Napa Valley. And so you don't want them already like pre-pressing themselves with their own weight in the bins. So the Francionis are very good at.
Alison, are you using refrigerated trucks to transport?
No, we don't need it from down there because they pick early enough and it gets here cool and early enough in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Steve, welcome back. We were going to join you.
Yeah.
Why don't you give us a little update? Tell us when you started harvest. And I'd also love you to, after you give us a little overview, speak to Chardonnay a little bit. We've been talking about.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Good to see some familiar faces online here. Yeah, we started the first week in September, and one thing different about this season than any previous season is I got a chance to go back and get some fruit from Smith and Hook from that vineyard. There was plenty of it, unfortunately, for Smith and Hook, but playing with some Mount Eden on 420A, and then I also got some fruit from Bokanugan this year, some Clone 113, both clones that I've not dealt with before. And so it was neat to get fruit from different parts of the Highland rather than all just from our estate vineyard. You know, it took over the course of 3 weeks, we had pretty much all the Pinot picked out. And then actually Chardonnay followed the Pinot Noir this year, thanks to the acidity that the vineyards in the northern end tend to retain. So we were waiting for that to happen, although we do tend to pick twice. We'll pick early for some ripe apple and pear, and then we come back in a couple weeks later, and we get that apricot, you know, tone. So it was a great year. There wasn't any botrytis in our Chardonnay, and sometimes we'll get a little bit, So that was really neat. And Matt mentioned the lack of fog. This was the least amount of fog in a season I've seen since I can remember. And I know the folks over in Carmel were joyous that they didn't wake up to fog as many mornings as usual. And I just wanted to call attention to something, that seems to be happening more and more. So, we had two hype spikes, one in July and then one in October after we were finished picking in the Highlands. And that one in July, we had a temperature difference. At the coast was 65 degrees in Castroville, and it was 112 in King City, and that's about 50 miles. And so that maritime influence was huge and really helps cool the Highlands off. But then in October, when we got an offshore flow, thank goodness we had a lot of that fruit off because the duration was longer than most of us wanted. And there just wasn't that temperature differential. It was 90 in Monterey, and 112 in King City. So very, very different heat spikes.
Glad we had everything off the vines there. We have talked a little bit about, the what you saw in the vintage. I'd love to hear a little bit, maybe Adam, starting with you. You had mentioned, some of the differences that you're seeing in the growing season. What about the wines that you're tasting now from the 2024 vintage? What's different in terms of flavor or ripeness or?
Sure. I also think there was kind of a cool period, maybe a week, maybe even 10 days, like September 21st, that middle kind of, it was like a warmer period, then a real cool period, and then a warmer period. And it seemed like there was real differences to me as to what came in before that cool period, and then what came in after. What came in before tended to be more moderate sugar levels, even it was hard in some ways even to see sugars climbing much at all. I went down 3 weeks in a row and didn't really see much movement. But then after the heat, you ended up seeing, or after that cool period and then that next warm up, that's when you really saw sugar start to bump up and changes. So I think there's two different sorts of wine being made potentially this year. Some of the early stuff tends to be a bit more moderate in alcohol, which makes sense. Good weight, good concentration. I did a lot of bleed off, a lot of Saignée, because I did find things quite juicy. So I did a good amount of bleed off there. The stuff that came in later tends to be bigger, heavier, darker, a bit just more robust in flavors, quite bold. While the stuff before that is got very good acidity, as SLH often does, and but it's a little more elegant, a little more red fruited.
Matt, how about you? Any things you're noting between the 2023 or 2024 vintage?
Yeah, the 24s just have great typicity. I mean, our Rosella is like red fruited, super velvety, soft tannins, and you go like, Gary's and Sobranis they're less than a mile down the road. But the soil's a little more gravelly, but they're dark fruited and rich and ripe. But when I say dark fruited, it's like a crunchy dark fruit. It's like a freshly ripened blackberry. So the wines have tremendous freshness and sense of place. Great acid, like almost to a fault in some cases, because we're kind of waiting for that acid to kind of calm down a little bit before we pick in a lot of cases. And like Adam said, we did a significant bleed off. Basically, all the hopper juice that falls off the table, whether it be 15 or 20%, was just left out. Good concentration and spending 17, 18 days on skins and just kind of letting things mellow out in tank has yielded some really nice wines. Different than the 23s. I think the 23s, I mean, that was a classic vintage, a very elegant vintage. The 24s are maybe a little bit more ripe and a little bit more bold, I would say.
They're California. We have somebody who's asking over in the chats about how the 23s are coming along. So maybe like Alison or Steve, both of you, Alison, why don't you start out? Maybe compare two vintages for
people. I
see
that Randy Peterman was asking how they're doing. Ours is in bottle now. We bottle our Pinot Noirs in July, and I just revisited it, and there's a lot of hype about the 2023, and I think it's real. Those wines, there's something very special about them. They're super elegant, but there's this extra depth to the wines. I get a lot of dark flavors from the ones we produced that year. So that 23 is tasting amazing in bottle right now. And just a reminder to everyone that 2024s are still not complete yet. You know, these are still going through their, you know, they finished their primary fermentation with yeast, and now these are going through malic and barrel. So there's still going to be a lot of brightness when we're tasting them as winemakers, as we're guiding them through the barrel aging and malic process. But so far, I agree with the comments before about 24. It feels like a classic vintage. So far, I mean, you know, we taste these throughout fermentation, we tasting them now, and everything is in balance. And there's a really good complexity and an extra dimension to the wines in 24. I think it's going to be delicious.
I agree with Alison. Our 23s are very beautiful wines that we're really excited about their potential. It's like it was this year, a tale of two seasons. And Adam, I think that's what you're talking about. And I think the acid pH balance is better this year than it was last year. Last year, it seems like was one of the few years that we've had to acidify Pinot, to adjust pH. That's just so rare in our vineyard. And so I have high hopes for both vintages, because we dodged the October heat wave and we had everything in. It was almost a perfect growing season from my standpoint, with less fog and a better photosynthetic activity throughout the year.
Matt and Alison, I wanted to ask you guys another kind of layer of question. We already talked about the fact that you're sourcing Pinot Noirs and Matt, in some instances now these days for Siduri Chardonnay from such a long distance, so many miles. How do you deal with these sort of logistical challenges when you're bringing fruit in from so many regions? Like, how does that add on to just the harvest experience for both of you? Alison?
You have to love organizing. So the logistics are part of the fun part of it. It's like a puzzle. And you have to be very good at time management, because to make great wine, you have to be present. You have to be present in the vineyard. You have to be present during processing. You have to be present through the fermentation of the wine. So I certainly have to have a very kind of rigorous calendar schedule to make sure I'm hitting all those points at the right time. So those are some of the key things that you have to watch logistically when you're working with trucking from all over. So you also have to have a great team. We have a vineyard department. They're providing us with data and observations in the vineyards, which we then go out and use that data when we're looking at the vineyards ourselves too. And for processing, we have a very highly trained team. So we're checking in and making sure everyone knows what they're doing, knows when the fruit is coming in, knows what tank it's going to. And then every day tasting those wines, making sure the yeast are happy. It's very important to make sure they have the right environment so the wine's complete, and there's no more sugar in the fermentation at the end. And then also paying attention to extraction and all of those great things. So we keep busy, and I'm pretty proud of the number of wines we produce. I don't only make WALT, Pinot, and Chardonnay. Also in our winery, we make Hall Cabernet and Sauvignon Blanc. So my Pinot harvest lasted from September 10th to October 5th. But my entire harvest is started on August 14th and ended on October 15th. So it's a bigger range there. So I'm gonna guess I'm still the most tired winemaker in this chat.
I won't debate you on that.
Yeah.
I might, but only because I'm in Las Vegas. The last night was rough, so that
different reason.
Yeah. Well, that's so for me, it's like, unlike Alison, I don't love organizing. Like I'll do it when I'm forced to, and harvest definitely forces you to. I love being out in the vineyards early and often, and kind of maintaining the pulse of the vineyard with all of our growers. Also because it gets me out of the office. I mean, the part that lured me into winemaking at all was being outside and working with the vines, and also just trusting that your growers and your vineyard managers know what you're looking for, because we cover so much ground. It's hard to be everywhere at once, but if I call Gary Francione and need an update on how things are tasting, he can be very candid and give me honest feedback, and he doesn't want to rush people to pick, knowing how kind of tightly allocated and what small quantities we get of these beautiful vineyards. There's not a lot of margin for error. So it's about maintaining those friendships and really, relationships and partnerships that make it all work out. And especially with the Willamette stuff being so far flung, just having some repetitions with our vineyard teams, knowing what the winemaking team is looking for, makes life a lot easier. It's a lot of fun. Alison, you're probably more tired than me, but I'm pretty tired too.
It really highlights the relationship and the communication and kind of the important bond between the grower and the winemaker. Really, the logistics and the dance of harvest, doesn't it?
100%.
Someone's asking about the drinking windows on the 2023s. I don't know how y'all feel, but I am guessing the 23s are they're drinkable, but they're gonna age a long time, it seems like to me, because of that balance and elegance they have. And then it might be a year. It's kind of early to say this because Alison, you were saying, the 23s are babies. I mean, we're not through ML yet. We're not, it's
the 24s.
24s, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, 24s. But it would not surprise me if I, in a year would say, hey, be drinking your 24s while you're still aging your 23s.
I think the same thing can be said for the 21s versus the 22s.
Yeah.
I think the 22s are in this awesome window right now, and the 21s are kind of like legs like a newborn deer. They wobble around a bit. They're awesome, and they're kind of going into a kind of a slower phase, and they'll reemerge later. But the 22s are seeing it, so I think it's a pretty similar analog to 23, 24.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us all what is going to be happening. We're done with harvest, you're done picking, but as you've both mentioned, Alison and Matt, you've got a lot of things happening still in barrel ML. Tell us kind of what the next couple of months look like, what happens in the winery, and then maybe Steve will turn to you and ask you a little bit about what happens kind of over winter in the vineyards.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're doing a really exciting thing. We're doing budgeting right now for 2025. It's always really fun right after harvest. We all love it. Figuring out what barrels and everything we're going to need for next year. And we go straight into planning, getting ready for our next bottling run. We're going to do a small bottling run in December, a few cabs, and December is when we bottle our Chardonnays. So 2023 Chardonnay is going to go into bottle next month for us. We feel that one needs a little more aging time before it goes into the bottle there. So I feel like I'm not really going to get a real rest until closer to the end of the month and December. And right now it switches over to barrel work. So we try to top and stir our 2024 Pinot barrels every 2 weeks. That helps. Bringing up the lees helps build the body in the wine through this process. We like a slow malic fermentation too. It delays when you start having to add sulfur to your wines because there's the malic bacteria is still producing some CO2. The wine is still protected. Once that ends, that's when we make our first sulfur addition to the wine. So that's one of the ways we're able to keep the sulfur levels in our wine as low as possible while still keeping the wine fresh. So that's a glimpse into what's going on at Walton Hall right now in Napa Valley.
Yeah, we're just kind of hanging out. Like Alison, we keep the cellar pretty cool, so we don't really start rolling through ML till like January, February. Giving the wine more time without additions of SO2. It also helps stabilize the color and also stabilize the structure. It makes softer, rounder wines. It also holds the color a bit better if you can sync up those color molecules in the tannins. We're going bowling on Friday. Yeah, I know I don't have a lot of budgetary input, but yeah, we're relaxing. We're trying to make it home before dark with the time change. And I think, generally speaking, the best thing to do with Pinot and barrel is nothing. Just top and hang out and wait.
That's a different approach than us. That's cool.
It Yeah,
we've done trials on that too. Like, do we like it better with more stirring, less stirring? Kind of depends on the vintage.
yeah,
And if
for
you're
sure.
looking for more reduction or more body.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. We just kind of let things emerge as they will.
I like it.
Well, out in the vineyard, we're going to have our harvest party on Friday, hoping it doesn't rain, and reward all the folks that have worked so hard. We have a raffle, and it's a lot of fun because we'll give away color TVs and barbecues and tool sets. So everybody's looking forward to Friday for sure. And our harvest, because my day job is farming other people's grapes and vineyards, lasts 11 weeks. So people are good and tired, whether they've binge watched a Netflix series or they stayed out all night with a harvester. But and we're planning right now. We're looking at pulling some of the older blocks. We're testing for virus. We're roguing vines that look like they may be virused. So that's really important this time of year. And on the newer vineyards, the new developments we have, like La Reina, we're planting cover crop and hoping the vines go to sleep here pretty soon in such a banana belt. We really don't get a lot of cold weather in the Highlands, fortunately, for the citrus growers.
Hoping for rain too, season, huh?
Yeah.
Very good. Adam, how about you?
A little out on the road sales time right now. It's an opportunity, knowing that harvest was coming along and wasn't as late as 2023. It's an opportunity to get out and go visit some markets. I mean, I am in Las Vegas right now and worked yesterday. We're going to be in Texas next week. We'll go through and top every few weeks, and then we'll check for ML. We don't inoculate. The cellar's cool. Some years it moves along faster than others. It's just kind of letting it go at this pace. But I think what Matt said, which is, not wanting to try to overmake it all, let it happen the way it happens and go from there. One thing that was mentioned, somebody asked a question about whole cluster fermentation. I do quite a bit. This year I did about 75% whole cluster on the stuff. But one of the odd things I noticed this particular year, as opposed to say 2023, was that after about 2 weeks on the skins and stems, there tended to be a bitterness that was developing a little bit. And so I got my stuff off last year. 2023 was like 3.5 weeks on the skins. In 2024, I was only on like 14 days. I don't know if anybody else does a lot of whole cluster or.
I'm really excited because we have never we don't do whole cluster in Santa Lucia Highlands, except for this year. I finally found my opportunity. I love whole cluster, and so it was in one of our Rosella's blocks. It was one of the Dijon clones, and it had that perfect combination of some nice small berries that I wanted to preserve, and the stem was ripe. And I learned from Adam a great method for testing if the stems are right. You actually bite the stem itself. So everyone laughs at me in the cellars. I'm like chewing on the grape cluster. We only did about 10%, but it was on our little bit earlier pick out there. And I'm really happy with the extra dimension of structure and aromas that brought to the wine. So I'm excited for my first Santa Lucia Highlands whole cluster ferment this year.
Yeah, it does really cool things. It almost gives you this like pseudo carbonic-y, beautiful pop of like bubblegummy red fruit too. So it's a really fun thing to have in the playbook and at the blending table.
Yeah, we use about 20% normally, and that's where we ended up this year. We thought would be appropriate, and I agree, it does add an extra dimension for sure.
Very good. Thank you. We've got another question from Randy here. Maybe Steve, this is a good one for you. Randy's asking about the Santa Lucia Highlands and whether it is as impacted as some of the other California AVAs might be related to global warming. I know he's very familiar with the SLH. Randy's always at our event every year at Marseille. So he knows the wind, he knows how cool it is. Steve, perhaps you can talk a little bit to kind of how SLH differs from some of our other AVAs.
Yeah, thank you, Randy, for the question. That's kind of what I was referring to with regards to the maritime influence in July, where it was 65 in Castroville and 112 in King City. That maritime influence is everything to protecting the vineyard. Had it been, so the vineyard in July, if we're 65 in Castroville is 92, 93, we can tolerate that without any deleterious effects. But, you start to get above that, and depending upon how far along you are in phenology, if you're through veraison and the darkening, and, you get that kind of in temperatures in the hundreds, it's just devastating. And so we've been using actually shade cloth in our vineyard on road direction we're not real happy with, that we inherited, from 1972. And we really like that on the afternoon sun side for protection. And I think in California, I was surprised in the North Coast how much shade cloth I saw this year on less than optimal road directions. But thank goodness for the Grand Canyon of Monterey, because it's highly protected through most of the growing season from effects of climate change.
Thank you, Steve. Adam Francioni dropped in another question too, asking you winemakers if you've had any other new winemaking experiments with the 2024 vintage. Anyone? All right, we got Alison with her whole cluster.
That was my whole cluster one. Yeah, that was my excitement. Good question, Adam.
Well, let me share a couple of things that Adam and Matt sent over. Adam Lee sent this over. Adam, speak to this cool image that you sent me.
Yeah, so it was something that these are two pretty average clusters from two vineyards immediately next to one another. That we happened to pick on the same day for Rombauer. So one of those is the Gary's Vineyard, and the other one is Winrock, which is right next door. But it's really showcases the difference in the clones. The Pizzoni clone, it's actually a selection that was a suitcase clone from France, tends to be fairly large cluster and somewhat larger berries. And then next door, the Calera clone, which also was a suitcase clone from France, came over, tends to be smaller clustered and somewhat smaller berries. And so I thought it was really fun that these came in on the same day. And I was able to reach in the bins and just kind of pick out and show the difference to some people.
It's very interesting, Adam. We really love the Calera clone in our vineyard. It's the cleaned up clone, because I think if you put it into a contest for the dirtiest wood, it would win. But the cleaned up clone 90 from UCD is our favorite, and we just planted some more of it this last year. It's a great clone.
Yeah.
This is a great image too, gives you so much insight into the berry size and how it can differ on the clusters too. Really cool. Okay, we've also got this beautiful looking bin of Pinot Noir from Matt. Matt, what is this?
Yeah, it's from Rosella's vineyard. So the first time I worked with any of the Santa Lucia Highlands fruit that we sold, I was interning at Costa Brown in 2010, and I was in charge of running the crush pad, and we have 6 sorters, and you dump Rosellas or any of the stuff the Francioni family farms onto the table, and they're like, everybody's looking at each other like, what do we do? It's perfect. So it's like, just move stuff around, look busy, or else I'm going to get in trouble. But pristine farming and just beautiful, beautiful fruit this year.
Gorgeous. And let's see, we've got this video. Matt, start
Yeah.
this off.
So this is night picking at Gary's. I try to make it to at least one, just to get one last look at it and meet Gary and be a team player. It helps that we usually pick last because we crush in Soledad. So the transit time to the winery is like 15 minutes. Yeah, you can go ahead and play it. But yeah, it requires a lot of hard work, and there's something really cool about. I was driving north from Santa Barbara, and once you get to the Salinas Valley past like King City, the valley and the Santa Lucia Highlands are just like aglow with farm workers. So it's a really special area, and kudos to all the hard work that goes into every harvest.
That's great. And then this is a beautiful one too. Matt, what have we got here?
Yeah, so this is the new clone for us. This is the Rosella's Pisoni selection. It's one thing to see it; it's another thing to smell it and just stick your face under the press as it's pressing out. I freaked out. It's it's really good stuff. But yeah, beautiful, beautiful wines this year. As Alison said, we're going through a Mel and just kind of hanging out and waiting.
Very good.
Matt,
Thank you.
when you were the video, when you were in the vineyard, was that around the full moon? I remember
It
going
was.
yeah, around that time, and it was such a big moon and so beautiful out.
Yeah, I think we were the night before the full moon.
But you
I
almost,
I still count it, so whatever.
I mean, you need lamps, but it's one of those things that it's like so bright at times. It's like you could almost do it without lamps, without
Yeah, yeah, but it's just it's a cool experience being out in the Highlands and in the driving through the Salinas Valley and seeing how much hard work goes into farming there.
Incredible. All right, well, we're getting close to wrapping things up here, but I know a lot of us are really curious about some of the nitty-gritty, real behind the scenes happening at harvest time. I'd like to know, what are y'all listening to? What is on the playlist? Matt, there was clearly something happening in the press photo or video we just saw. Maybe you guys can tell us what was like your most listened to playlist this year.
I mean, honestly, it's whatever the cellar crew wants to listen to make them happy. There's certain like do not play artists, and then I'll put on like bagpipes for 20 minutes as a form of punishment. The cellar crew does not like bagpipes, so there's none of that. It was a good year. It's very smooth.
How about you, Adam? What do you guys play?
It really does kind of depend. It's funny, I'm in Las Vegas now. We're going to go see Lionel Richie tonight. So, getting ready for that. But we came back from seeing Morgan Wallen here in Las Vegas. So it was kind of transitioning from country to some old kind of 80s type music. So I was kind of in the middle of that.
Yeah, my bluegrass station on Sirius XM gets downvoted pretty immediately. So
your Kentucky roots come out in you, Matt.
and in a not so great way.
Steve or Alison, any special playlists?
Well, I am pretty eclectic, Earth, Wind and Fire, Keith Urban, Casey Musgrave, Rodrigo y Gabriela are all in our playlist. And then for cleanup, we have to do Eminem because it's edgy, and you know how cleaning is. It's just, you don't enjoy it as much. So Eminem makes that time go by a little faster.
I would not have guessed that, Steve. Yeah, like kind of like Matt, we let our cellar crew choose their jams for the most part. And then something that's unique for me is, with everything that's going on here, it's just like so stimulating. There's a lot of times where I just need really chill thinking music. So I found this great Spotify station called Lo-Fi Beats. And if we ever had like a meeting where I just needed everyone to be calm, just turn that on and we can think and like get through our logistics and creative process. So that was my secret sauce this year.
Such an essential part of it. I love it. Any kind of crazy, unexpected, challenging, super challenging harvest moments that come to mind as we just kind of think through the last of this excellent season?
Yes.
I have one.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that, after the adrenaline wears off and you get through that part of the season where you're dragging a little bit, we ended up doing kosher wine. And we had not done that before. So we picked for Herzog Winery. It gets, we're talking about 500 tons of grapes. And it got blessed by the rabbi, the bins did, out in the field. And then they put a sticker or a shroud over the bins with the rabbi's seal on it. And that goes to Bakersfield and becomes red concentrate and then ends up in Israel. And the big joke was, whether that, it was an amazing experience. It was a lot of fun. And I don't know if we'll do it again because the price was pretty bad.
So for me, and I need to preface this, the lower section of the Gary's Vineyard that I've been getting since 1999 is unofficially called the Christians block after my son Christian, who was born in 1999, and that was the first crop at Gary's. And it was the first vineyard that Christian ever visited. And I thought I had raised just a wonderful son who was well aware of the struggles that we and the hours that we put in at harvest. And my son Christian decided to get married this year on September 20th, of all things. And I'm like, in San Antonio too, not just, so I had to jump on a plane, fly back to San Antonio for a wedding, turn around, and then come back for harvest. And then that weekend is when he threw a big party. So then I had to go to Dallas over the weekend again. So I had 2 Texas trips within 5 days in the middle of harvest. It was, and I think he could tell I was a little pissed off about it, but it worked.
Like
It was all
revenge.
fun. Yeah.
So mine would like refer back to that weird thunderstorm we had that affected parts of Monterey County. So some of the internal Jackson family operations kind of got put on pause. And I kind of waited till like 9:15, 9:30 a.m. to call Gary Francione because we had picks on the books for like the next day. And I called him, and Gary's kind of, he's a little chafed. I was like, what's going on, Gary? How many conversations about rain have you had this morning? He's like, I don't know why everybody's freaking out. I got 0.09 inches at Rosella's. Like, I was like, yeah, it's cool. Like all the picks are staying on. But I think that it freaks some people out that were farming in other areas because it was not on anybody's radar. It was a weird one.
Yeah, or down south.
Mm-hmm.
It is always something. We're going to wrap this up soon. If anybody has another question, drop it in the chat real quick while I put a couple of notes out there. As I mentioned, we always record and provide a transcript of this beautiful chat. So we will provide that to all of you who attended and our mailing list tomorrow. I also want to give a quick announcement. This has not gone out too widely, but so many of you know our annual Sun, Wind, and Wine Festival at Mare Soleil every May. We've moved it up 2 weeks. We have a new date. This is going to be Saturday, May 3rd, 2025. We're super excited. It's going to be another fantastic year, and just putting that out there. All of you on the chat, all of you winemakers, we'd love to have you come join us. It's just one of the best parties of the year. Come down and taste with all the winemakers. All the growers are there. Wonderful food and wine from the region. All the chefs from the peninsula come down too. It's really a great time. Any last questions that anybody sees there in the chat we can answer for you? Looks like we're all good. Well, everybody, I just want to thank our panelists so much. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Steve, again for joining in. It's been so wonderful to have you. We will keep this going next year. So we'll come back in April and see what's been happening through the winter.
Gwen.
Thank you for
Thank you,
joining.
Gwen, and thank all of you for joining.
Yep.
Bye, everybody. From
Everybody.
Reno, Nevada.
Thanks.
All right.
Hi, John. Bye, Linda.
Thanks,
Bye,
Adam.
guys. Take care.
Bye. Mhm.
Bye.
Thanks, Gwen.
Thanks for coming, everybody.